My name is Charles Watkinson, and I'm director of Purdue University Press, and I'm here to just say a few give you a few housekeeping tips, and also to welcome you on behalf of the Society for Scholarly Publishing. And my colleague Julia Blixrud will welcome you in a second on behalf of the Association of Research Libraries. So we're very excited indeed to be collaborating on this Partnering to Publish seminar, Innovative Roles for Societies, Institutions, Presses and Libraries. The organisation of the day is that we're going to start with a few sort of surveys of what's going on in this landscape from a variety of different perspectives, and Julia will introduce the first group of speakers and moderate that session. And then we're going to progress as if we were going through the publication process, and we're going to start after mid-morning coffee with editorial roles, very broadly defined, as you'll see. At about 12 o'clock, we'll break for lunch, and there'll be a buffet lunch outside, and then just bring your sandwiches back in here and keep discussing. And then we'll resume at 1 o'clock, and we'll have a session on production roles, again, very broadly defined, as we all change our roles around. And then after the afternoon break, we'll end up with marketing. We may have one speaker change during the day. Our colleague Barb Silcox is unfortunately unwell and may not be able to join us today, but that's right at the end of the day, so we're hoping she may feel better or find a replacement. So that's how we're going to progress through the day, from editorial roles to production to marketing. And in each section, as the moderators will tell you, we've decided to ask you to leave questions to the end. And I would ask you, and the moderators will remind you, if you could identify yourselves when you ask a question, that would be very helpful. As you'll see from Brett at the back of the room, this event is being recorded, and the recordings and presentations will be made available on the ARL and probably also on the SSP websites after the event. We're going to have brief introductions of people's names and titles, but if you'd like to see their full bios, go to the ssp.net website, sspnet.org website, and you'll find the full bios on the website. And there is wireless access in this room. You'll see the details up on the screen behind me. And we encourage you to tweet. We have a hashtag set up, and you'll see it there, #ARLSSP. After the event, you'll be getting an email with a link to a feedback survey, and we'd be very grateful if you could complete that. It will help us improve the quality of our seminars. And if you're not a member of SSP already, I encourage you to join. We're a group of individual members, so it doesn't matter where you come from, and the membership will follow you throughout your career. So there's a leaflet about joining SSP at the front, out at the table where you registered. So I think that's all that I wanted to cover. So I'm now going to hand over to Julia to start the session.
Thank you, Charles, and good morning, everyone. I see so many familiar faces in this room. I've been in this room actually a couple of other times for Bio 1 publisher and partner meetings. So this seems like this must be the place for partnership discussions. So I'm delighted that there are so many of you here that are interested in and willing to spend an extra day with us, which looks like a wonderful day to be outside. So fortunately we have a window that you can take a glance out every so often. On behalf of the Association of Research Libraries, I do want to say a welcome, because this is an important area for us, the partnering with scholarly societies, small publishers, an area of interest that my program, the Scholarly Communication, Reshaping Scholarly Communication program, is looking into. And so we're trying to find ways in which libraries can support the work of small publishers. And one of the ways that we've done it is to take a look at what's happening. And so hence I am the lead-off speaker in terms of talking a little bit about some landscape at work that ARL has done in the past couple of years. We like to take a stance and look and see where are our libraries and see what areas we can build on. So the topic that I've chosen, or the title for my particular presentation, is Research Library Support for Small Publishers. And this builds on what we've been seeing happening in some of our research institutions. So I'm going to give you some background on a couple of things that we've done in the past that might give you some idea of what we've been up to. The first one, and the one that I think most people are familiar with, was a survey that we conducted of our members in late 2007 that resulted in a work called Research Library Publishing Services. This was truly a first look at, well, we were hearing rumblings of what was happening in some of our members. They were doing something related to publishing, providing some sort of support, but we didn't have a good picture overall. So in the spring of 2008, we published this, and it's one of those popular works that's downloaded from our site. So we figure people are still interested in this. It is a couple of years old now, but it did have some revealing data for our members. At that particular time, 43% of the libraries indicated that they were doing some sort of publishing services. And I think before I go any further, I want to say that we're using publishing services. And as I continue to work in this particular arena and talk to people, I think the word services is an important aspect rather than just saying publishing, because it's an extension, and you'll hear about it today in all of the subsequent sessions, the importance of the variety of activities that go in support of the publishing process. So what are libraries doing in terms of publishing services? An additional 36% were considering or planning to do some sort of services, and at the time 21%. I don't know how much that has changed. I suspect we'd see a lot more of the brighter blue color now, and the red the red were 36. I'm seeing the red disappearing. I think we're going to get a lot more in the blues for this particular area of interest, because as I talk to some of our members, they're doing it. And for people who attended the Digital Repositories meeting in Baltimore yesterday, we heard from some people that were, at their particular institutions and what they were doing, and Corridor Conversation indicated that as well. At that time, there were a number of kinds of software we asked, what are you doing in terms of support? Open Journal Systems seemed to be the most popular then, some DSpace at that time implementations, quite a few locally developed options, bpress, dpubs, other things were coming up. And I don't, again, that's one of those snapshots in terms of what people were doing. Here was one I thought was an interesting chart that came out as part of our study. What were the services that people were doing in post-production that the libraries were providing? And some of that were what you would think of as library kinds of activities, the metadata and cataloging, certainly preservation, registering for ISSN, which is after my own heart. I am full disclosure, a former head of the US ISSN agency, so that should have 100% there. Open URLs and other kinds of, and the other activity, notification of ANI sources, that's an interesting activity. And these charts are all in the report on the web, so you won't have any trouble finding them and getting the behind-the-scenes data on that. But see, these were post-production services very targeted to what libraries do in their own operations. So how are libraries funding these kinds of publishing services? And I suspect that these are still the same funding sources that we're seeing today. They're coming out of our hides. They're the library operating budget, because it has been determined that this is an area of support. We think in libraries that supporting the publishing process is important and therefore part of our mission, so we're going to build it into our budget, and we're hearing a little bit more and more certainly from our directors that that's what they're doing. Looking for grant support, as always, endowment funds if they can be redirected. I think This was in 2007 they were surveyed. Additions to the library budget. I'm not so sure if you asked anybody today if you're going to get a lot of positive response there. We don't get, not too many people are getting huge amounts of money to their library budget in order to fund publishing services, but there are ways that people are looking at how, mostly reallocation. Some revenue and sales, when those titles are in fact titles that have subscription revenue. Charging back to campus units. We're providing support to our unit. We can figure out a way to make that cost effective for you in your unit, but also recover costs for us, and maybe a few royalties. The additional services that we're starting to see, that we were starting to see there in terms of the libraries that said they were providing support, included digital repository services. Now, what's interesting to me is it said you're providing publishing services and additional services are repositories, but what we were hearing earlier this week was that repository services are a way that people get involved in publishing, so there's a little bit of cross-fertilization there. The additional digitization services, which I think are increasingly important and evident as more libraries digitize as much content as they can that's on their campus. Consultations on author copyright and other advisory roles in terms of for authors. What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? How am I going to publish this, and so on, and a little bit, but not a whole lot, of editing services. The next study that we did looked at the current models of digital scholarly communication, and this was a study that Ithaca conducted for us. Many of our libraries were out and about talking to their faculty about the kinds of new forms of publication that they were involved in. I think this first study, when we looked at what people were doing, there was a lot of, in people's minds, of what is the support that I provide for publishing services. It is in the area of journal support. I mean, that's a sort of, when you hear publishing, people think journals, and that certainly is the case with a lot of our members. So one of the things we want to do is sort of push the boundaries a bit and say, well, what are the new forms, what are the new models in terms of publications that people are involved in? And these types of digital scholarly works were identified as part of that particular study. Certainly e-journals were a big chunk of them, but there are a variety of other kinds of works that came up as a result of that. So if you start thinking about providing publishing support and publishing services, if these are the new forms of publishing that your researchers and scholars are engaged in, that sort of broadens one's institutional thinking about how do I provide support for this activity? What are the kinds of things that I should be doing? So most recently, and one of the reasons that Charles called and asked, would you talk a little bit about a recent study that we had done as part of our, okay, now what's happening out there? Late, or I guess it was spring of 2009, we had what I sort of called the Matchmaker Project idea. This came from Judy Luther and October Ivans, who had been looking also at, Judy had worked on a tipping point project, when our journal's going to go electronic. We'd seen some of these other projects thinking about preservation activities. There is some unknown number of small print, small titles, small run titles that are out there sitting on our campuses, sitting in independent publishing land. And wouldn't it be nice if there was a way for research libraries who are developing these publishing support services to find some of these small titles that are right now only in digital form and help them move to a digital environment, thereby ensuring some stability for them, thereby ensuring increased visibility, and we will do we will come up with this matchmaking idea. And on paper, it sounded pretty good, so let's go ahead and do some investigation on it. So there were basically 3 project phases that we went through. One of them was to identify the candidate journals, and that took from July through November of 2009. And that was a process where libraries were interviewed by the consultants to say what kinds of titles, what are the criteria for these titles, what are you seeing? Because what's happening at the same time is many of our libraries are dumping print subscriptions. Okay, so even though these are little small titles, people are still dumping them because they're print. And I'm sorry, but we need to have all of this electronic stuff, and even if the print subscription doesn't cost much to buy, it begins to cost more to handle, to process. So getting this stuff in electronically, we've got better work processes for that. So what kinds of titles would you be looking at? They also were able to get access to a large vendor file and sort of ran some numbers for us. Well, the first numbers that came up, and we said scope it, North America, actually US and Canada, and we had somewhere in the 20,000s of titles, okay? This is a bigger problem than we thought. So it could be whittled down, certainly, and I think they got to about 4,000 titles that looked like they would fit some of the criteria that the libraries had identified. And these would be titles that, okay, we could match them with the libraries. So then they began a process of interviewing the faculty editors or the publishers of these journals to figure out, well, what did they need or what could they use in terms of library support from this process. And they looked across several disciplines and have some interesting stories to tell. And the third one was to look at what the different publishing options are that would be available to these particular small publishers. And in fact, there are 3 different kinds that were identified by the consultants. One is full-service publishers. Shared revenue, you could put that in parens because some of these cases they may not have a significant amount of revenue. That's where the research libraries might come in. Probably university presses are an option, and of course commercial providers. There were also the fee-based publishing services, and I've listed some of them here that are familiar names to those in the publishing community, maybe not as much to the library community. A variety of platforms that these folks could move to, and also then in terms of sales and marketing, which was a piece that comes up as a criteria within the small publishers. Many of these titles, even though they're print, they could put out stuff that goes into aggregations, and so aggregators were another area to look at. The nonprofit ones, familiar to many of us, and then of course commercial aggregators. That became a little bit more interesting as there were discussions about whether, from the point of view of the project, which was to ensure long-term access, we could give that kind of recommendation to small publishers because many of those aggregations, those things come and go much more quickly. So we do have a report from the consultants, and they've met 3 times with our steering committee to talk about the project, and we are in the midst of editing that report for publication. I had hoped to have it available now, but to take a report and turn it into something that I think would be more useful for the community is taking me a little bit longer than I wanted. But it is in fact more detailed and some background in each of those particular areas. But I wanted to share with you some of the findings. And this was my finding. Okay, the matchmaker, this was a fiddler on the roof thing, matchmaker, matchmaker. And we get to the point where, you know what happened in the fiddler on the roof? The daughters made their own matches. It was actually one of the things that we were finding is that many institutions, while they're willing to handle somebody on their own campus, there's other people out there, unless they fit the mission of your university, I can't take you, right? I might have capacity to take a journal, but I can't take you because you don't fit into my mission or my scope or whatever. So the importance in the match is the clarity and the purpose and the joint interests. So if you can establish that within your campus, great, and probably that's where when you hear the stories of individual research institutions supporting particular editors on campus, it's because, yes, they align with our own interests. From the publisher or editors, we were hearing this connection to, there's a difference in their minds between institutional connection and disciplinary connection. Not surprising, given that many of them are in fact focused on the discipline. That is why they're wanting to do this particular journal. So they're working with a particular institution isn't so much. They just want to, have everybody in their discipline have access to a title. And then there are those who, there still is, how do we fund this thing? And for many, labor of love and open access, that means more people see my stuff. Super. Others, no, we've got a model right now that we have to figure out how to recover costs, and we don't know how to do that except by subscriptions, and so we need some support in that. And the importance of complementary skill sets. Who's got what? Who can do what for us? One of the stories was that when the interview started and a publisher editor person said, "Oh, I don't need to talk to you. Everything's going fine. My title, I'm getting all my subscriptions." And towards the end of the project, I think it was October, Ivan's got a call, same publisher guy going, "Oh my gosh, my subscriptions dropped. What do I do?" All that question of that he didn't want to hear, or the discussion that he wanted to have or didn't want to have in September, in January. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about this. So the times changed for them, and now they need skills, they need help, they need whatever. And we also discovered that each of these individuals are very individual. Lot of hand-holding. I'm seeing some nodding here. Lot of hand-holding. It can be a time sink to work through some of these issues with people, and we don't have processes in place to do that. What the consultants found in terms of lessons for libraries is that there are two specific areas in which we don't have as much background, and that is in terms of business planning skills for these kinds of enterprises, in terms of dealing with the cost components, even in looking at some of the staffing needs. Yesterday, or day before yesterday, when there were conversations at the digital repositories meetings about costs. One of the challenges is how do you build a cost model that helps people see where all the costs are when in fact you've distributed it across a number of partners. And then the online visibility and marketing. There's a difference between discovery and proactive marketing, and we've got to start thinking in terms of libraries if we're going to be helping these publishers. Putting something in a repository or publishing it on a platform and saying it is now available is different from pushing information out to a specific community or a broad community in terms of marketing. So there's a couple of the things that had come up. The surprises were the extent of the problem. It was just much bigger than we thought. And that raises the question of, do these guys all have to be saved? Are all titles worth it? And one has to start thinking about that in terms of any conversation. That again goes back to mission and goals. The capacity issues in terms of our libraries. Lots of people are doing lots of things, but how deep are those capabilities? University presses, which were, oh yeah, maybe we can push that a lot of this off to university presses. No, I see heads shaking. No, they are. Many of them have. That is especially some of these new forms or even the small journals. In this case, this is not their area. This is not their expertise. And then there, of course, is this challenge of imprint or brand. Who's going to be publishing this in my name? Whose name? And so on, which matters to universities, to the publisher, to the individual title. So our recommendations are that we will provide for the community some talking points so that the libraries can at least begin working with these campus editors, prepare some annotated bibliography. The report itself has a sort of an options landscape that we can look at. There's strong interest in case studies that people can use to share with particular types of titles that they're working with. Maybe a database of best practices. And the expanded annotated bibliography was something that had come up. There's actually a lot written out there. And I should say that Rain Crow at Spark is working on sort of a meta-analysis of all these documents to try to pull them together, because somebody says, oh, I don't think there is anything. Well, actually, there are quite a few books and sources and resources that people can use. And perhaps some meetings, and this is actually an example of one where we can work together. They also recommended a referral service whereby somebody who has a particular author says, I can't deal with this person, could send a note to a group. Do you want to deal with this person? And have some contact names who might be able to provide some advice and consultation on an informal basis, might even give some tips and so on. And that has worked actually for Spark in their campus open access policies arena, and we're sort of looking at that model for this particular activity. Which leads to the fact that there are resources out there for some of this campus publishing on the Spark site that we direct people to. If you haven't seen them, I hope you have, but take a look at them because there's quite a good set of resources out there. And the last thing I want to mention is the actually a little flyer on your table, which is about the research project that the Purdue University Libraries, University of Utah and Georgia Tech University, working on a collaborative IMLS grant that is in fact bookending. And they're taking a similar survey to what we did, that first survey about looking at the landscape, broadening that survey to say what all is happening in the world of library support for scholarly publishing and publishing services. So I think we'll look forward to their results. So thank you very much.
So our next speaker is Rick Clement, Dean of Libraries at Utah State University. Rick.
Well, thank you, Charles. You know, it's a real pleasure to be here. And I can't tell you how excited I am. Because, yes, I'm Dean of Libraries. We've just brought the press into the library, and, you know, I always wanted to have a press, so I'm excited about that. But, you know, when I go all the way back to when I went to library school at the University of Chicago, I worked for the University of Chicago Press in the Journals Division. I was the editorial assistant for the Library Quarterly. And then I spent 22 years at the University of Kansas, where actually I was in rare books. I was head of the Department of Special Collections. And I was the University Fine Press printer, so I had 5 19th century printing presses where we made books by hand. Taught history of the book for all those years at Kansas, and so I've thought about some of these issues. I'm a historian. I've written 2 books on the history of publishing in the United States. And so I've given some thought to the situation. Now, I know that almost anything I say to this group, there are going to be exceptions, but that's the nature of history. So what I want to do is acknowledge that there are threats to the continuation of university presses. And I want, as a historian, look back and see just, you know, how did this all come about, and then look to the future. And obviously, as a librarian with the press in the library, I kind of think that's the future for some presses, not all. And just give you a very brief idea of what we're trying to do at Utah State. Well, you know, this is a quotation that I think that gets dragged out whenever anybody looks back to the foundation of university presses, but nonetheless, it's pertinent. because Gilman, in founding Johns Hopkins, one of the great research universities, thought there should be a university press, and I think that is a fundamental part of the mission of any university press, and remains so to this day, that we need to get research and scholarship out beyond the walls of the university. And what better way to do it than with a press? So university presses really have two functions. There is that dissemination or publication function, but then there is the certification function, and that's not something that was built in from the beginning. That's something that sort of happened, grew up, and I know that there are a number of press directors who wouldn't mind seeing that aspect go away. But it remains a very, very important function for universities, for higher education. Now, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at how the numbers stack up here, and this is just a simple graph showing the years in which university presses were established. And so we can see, I mean, there's no surprise here. I think we're all aware of what Sputnik did, and the huge push in the late 50s through the 60s. We see all kinds of state colleges turning into universities, and so presses are being founded. But what I think is really interesting is we see that peak in the 70s, and then there's not too many presses being founded these days. And we can talk about the reasons for that in a few minutes. Now, I also took these numbers and looked at them a little bit differently, and now this is the total number of U.S. university presses. And of course, trying to find these, how many university presses are there in the United States? That's not an easy number to come up with. But anyway, I went through the AAUP directory, and this is what I came up with. But so we see this leveling off. Now, you could say, well, that's about right. That's about the number we should have. But we've got 283 research universities in the United States, according to the Carnegie classification. So, is it about right, or is something else going on here? Well, let's take a look at what's happened over time. If we go back to the original establishment of most university presses, they tended to publish their own faculty. And there's been this shift, and it's a shift I think that was favored by all parties, that we really shouldn't be publishing our own faculty. It's an implied conflict of interest, and there are those tales of Dean coming along saying, well, you've got to publish Professor so-and-so's monograph, even though it's awful stuff. He didn't say that, but the press director thought it. And so it was a good thing to publish other faculty at other places, and it built the reputation. It built the national reputation for a press. And in good times, that's a model that works. But at the same time, we have seen a gradual diminution of subsidies. Now, more or less, some presses have got endowments, some are independent, some don't even need subsidies. But for the smaller university presses, this has been the case, and so presses have had to look elsewhere. So let's take a look at these two. As I mentioned, as presses have tended to publish other faculty at other institutions, that builds a national reputation. I know a couple of press directors who, when they came into their jobs, mid-70s, 80s, found a situation where the list was rather chaotic. It had a bit of this, a bit of that, and the reason for that was because Professor so-and-so in, let's say, 18th century history came along and said, well, I've got this scholarly monograph, I'd like the press to consider it. It was solid, but that's the only thing on the list in that area. But they went ahead and published it. So it only made sense from the point of view of a lot of directors to come in and consolidate the list, concentrate in certain areas. That's a sort of a trade approach. Well, but what happens, though, if you're not publishing your own faculty? A lot of faculty don't even know the press exists. It erodes support. You talk about marginalization. What then does marginalization do for you? It lessens the amount of support you get from central administration. So we see the subsidies being reduced, and so presses are forced to look elsewhere for income. Well, positive, forced collaboration. It's forced presses to look for grant funding, development kinds of things. But the negative is that there's fewer scholarly monographs being published in favor of something else that can help pay, such as trade books, textbooks, regional books, other kinds of publications. And this just aggravates and complicates the tenure and promotion process, because we all know that the junior faculty coming up, particularly in certain disciplines, need to publish 1, maybe even 2 scholarly monographs to get tenure. And as there are fewer of those being published, there's a crunch. So let's take a look at the various external factors that we've seen over the last century. University presses continue to have that central mission of publishing scholarly monographs. You know, that's different from a commercial firm, and we all know there are a number of commercial scholarly publishers, and they can choose to get out of that business. But I think for most university presses, this is the core. This is the reason for their existence. So we've also mentioned increasing emphasis on scholarly monographs for tenure, and then we are all well aware that since about the middle 70s, we have had a continuing erosion of university budgets, particularly from state, I'm speaking of public universities, from state funding sources. Now in libraries, we see a decreasing monographic purchasing, and this is directly tied to increasing journal costs, particularly in the STEM areas. And most university presses don't publish in those areas with their journals. Some do, though, but most don't. And individual scholars have tended to stop buying monographs in some fields. Others, they still continue. But I can tell you as a librarian, the reason for this is because of these big packages. Now we're buying huge multi-year deals with Elsevier or the Web of Knowledge or whatever it might be, and we can't cut that. The only place where we have any room to cut anything is in the monograph, the pool of money for monographs, because those are firm orders, single orders. And that always is where we cut it. So libraries have less and less money to spend. Now, another factor, of course, is the digital revolution. We've all been living through that. And then finally, the real kick in the rear is the Great Recession in 2008. It's just one thing after the next. So let's take a look at the crisis of the scholarly monograph. If you look at the statistics, we see that unit sales have declined by more than 75% since the 1970s. That's pretty significant. So what have presses done? All sorts of things. Camera-ready copy. Yeah, get the author to do it. Templates. Again, force the author to follow some rigid template. Outsourcing, I think that's been fairly successful. We're all doing that. Smaller print runs. Of course, digital allows us to do some of these things we couldn't do before with offset. POD, print on delivery. Print on demand, excuse me. And what about increasing prices? Again, if you look at some of these commercial scholarly publishers, particularly in the UK, we see a model where they have been successful in printing maybe 250, 300 copies, but the cost is over $100 per copy. And as I've talked to university press directors, they just don't want to go there. You know, they talk about their mission, or maybe course adoption. You know, we just can't. And besides which, we can't do it alone, and so there's sort of gridlock there. What about changing publishing strategies? You know, the old strategy is you bring out a hardback, you wait for the cost to be recovered, then you bring out the paperback. Well, we've got ebooks now, and that really skews things. And some presses have tried to bring out paperbacks right from the beginning. I don't know. That's a hard thing to figure what could maybe make it profitable. I've already talked about consolidating the list. At Utah State, we have our list. The list was, you know, as I said, when the press director came in, it was all over the place. Kind of reflected, actually, the publishing activities of the faculty across the university, but we concentrated in folklore, for instance, and English composition, and then, you know, local history. And that made a lot of sense. And other presses, I think, have done that too. Or maybe just entirely take a look at something that's not selling and change it entirely. But often I don't think this has been done with reference to the university's strengths in teaching and research. And then again, publish more profitable books. We've talked about that already. Now, digital revolution, I think we all understand very well how this has transformed society in many, many ways. In terms of publishing, of course, you know, all the editorial tasks, workflow digitized, print on demand. Most scholarly journals have moved from print to digital, although I guess maybe not all. And you know, I can also speak, I edit a journal. We're in our 19th year, and we haven't moved. We're still print. I understand that. I'm a director of a small society, and so there are very different competing views as to all of this. But as far as we're concerned in libraries, we've gone to digital for our scholarly journals. And scholarly books are moving, kind of. But you know what? In libraries, that's where we want them to be. Because our students tell us, if it's not online, it doesn't exist. Now, to top it off, we get hit with this, you know, mother of all budget cuts. And I don't know what's happened in your universities. I know this is different across the country. There are actually a few places that have not had budget cuts, but we had 17% at Utah State. And so this has put a number of presses in jeopardy, and you know, several have been eliminated. But I will point out no libraries have been eliminated. Just to give you a sense, the press at Utah State was on the chopping block. You may remember there was some news about that, and the provost was really conflicted because the press reported right to him, and he had to cut that 17% out of his own budget. And so when he's looking at the honors program versus the university press, what's going to get cut? So the university press director and I put together a proposal to bring the press into the library. But more on that in a minute. We have fewer funds to buy monographs. In some cases, those funds have been eliminated entirely because you can't. You can sort of cut around the edges of the serials, but those big packages, you just can't touch them. So, and I think you all know, larger numbers of returns, which I know you all enjoy. So I don't think there's any return to the status quo ante. We cannot go back. We have to go forward. Now, I think this is an interesting quotation from John Thompson, and I suspect you all know his books in the digital age. It's the wrong business model. As he points out, it's only possible to publish scholarly monographs if you publish something else that can then support that publication. If you try and publish only scholarly monographs, it's not going to work. Now, I'm sure there are exceptions, but I think generally that's true. So what do we need for a new business model? Well, I think the library's got a pretty good business model. And this is why we're seeing a number of presses coming into libraries. They're aligning with the library's business model. And that is to provide an essential, and that's a key word, essential service without charges to users. So if we see that the library and the press are essentially providing the same service, it's a distribution of research and scholarship to the university. And, of course, the press provides that additional essential service of certification. Then I think that we can make the publication of scholarly monographs a successful aspect of the press embedded in the library. And one part of that is what I call insourcing. And, you know, libraries are large organizations with a lot of talented people. We do a lot of things that presses already do, pretty mundane things like all of the accounting, all of these sorts of things. We've got lots of people with graphic design ability who are just dying to do editing and proofreading and these sorts of things. And let's use these folks. So a little internal reallocation. Well, let's take a look at how many presses are now part of University Library. And this is what I came up with. I'm not sure this is an authoritative list, but it's pretty interesting. And you know what's even more interesting is the trend. So if we take a look at 2007, we see 6 presses that were part of a library or had a reporting line to the library director. This year, we see 18. And that represents about 20% of the university presses in the United States. Now, here's what we're trying to do. We are launching a series we're calling USU Digital Monographs, and this is aimed only at our own faculty. We are committing to publish scholarly monographs, fully peer-reviewed in all fields. And I must say, it's got my press folks a little nervous, because I think like an awful lot of presses, they're all out of the humanities. And you really wonder what's going to happen if you get an engineering book. But I just say, well, you know what? We've got an engineering college right over there. We've got a lot of expertise. We'll deal with that as it comes up. But we've got 10 books now available, 2 books in press, 3 proposals. This is our attempt to bring the press back to the center of the mission of the university by tying it to what the faculty's doing. And we'll see how it goes. We're not giving up publishing yet in certain areas. We've gotten, I mentioned we do composition and rhetoric. Well, we've got a number of good course adoption books there. I mean, we're not going to cut off a revenue stream while it's in full flow. So we're trying to do this in a very careful way, and we'll see how this goes. We may fail, but we're going to try. So, a new vision for university publishing. Again, align the press with the business model of the library. Bring the press into the library. Now, you know, a number of those universities that I listed have the press reporting to the library dean or director, but that's it. And the press may exist way out on the edge of campus somewhere, but not in the library. Now, I'm not advocating actually physically moving the press into the library, but I think it should be moved organizationally. At Utah State, it is a library department. Doesn't report to me, reports to an associate dean. And adopt an open access model. That's what we're doing with this new series. It's coming out open access, free, no DRM. And then there will be a print-on-demand option. You do pay for that. There will be the various kinds of e-reader options. They will pay for that. So there'll be a little bit of revenue stream, but we have to realize that that's not the business model that I'm advocating. Of course, I know you're all saying, but how do you pay for this? Publishing is expensive. What do we say? Maybe $25,000 in costs per monograph, upfront costs. That money's got to come from somewhere. I recognize that. And I'm willing to stand up as an administrator and say, it can come out of my budget for a while. We're a small press, we can do that. We only have three and a half people in the press. So, but the goal here is to demonstrate to the university that the press is part of the central mission of the university and thus should be supported. Now, remember I said you can't go back. I don't think we can go back to the provost and say, well, you know, times are good now, how about some money for the press? I don't think that's going to happen. But we reconceptualize. We're in a very transformative period, and we can, what I'm talking about doing is bringing the press in with our digital initiatives department. We are publishing right now 6 and soon many more journals. The press doesn't publish journals. I'm not asking them to do that. But we in the library are. Their colleagues sitting next to them are. So we create a whole new entity. And, you know, I'm calling that right now a Center for Digital Scholarship and Publishing, but, you know, it could have a different name. But that's the sort of thing that can capture the imagination of the provost and the president and build considerable support through the faculty. And that's absolute key to provide new funding. So, what would be the results of this? Well, you know, I think that we can really do some interesting things, but we have to be absolutely true to that value of intellectual quality. So there has to always be the rigor of peer review. And then that's a return to the essence of university publishing. So concentrating on our own faculty, the peer review piece, and I fully believe that that will give us that new business model which provides full support to the press that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. So I'm particularly pleased to introduce the next speaker. As we were planning this session, where essentially we're talking about new roles, Barb Silcox, who I'd met at an SSP meeting, really pointed out that in the federal library sector, there are some very interesting examples of rather differently done things. And we can learn from these. So I'm very pleased to introduce Bonnie Mueller, who's Director of Library and Information Services at the Government Accountability Office.
Thank you. Yes, as I'm listening to these presentations, we definitely are a different model. And there are a few parallels between what you will hear today and what I'm presenting now. And it'll be interesting to learn what you can take away from this. Since we are a government agency, we're not as motivated by money earned from publishing. We are concerned about how much it costs. And at GAO, we have a new role model where not only are the libraries integrally involved in publishing, but some other units also, and that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about. Basically taking content creation to publishing. The obligatory copyright statement, which says we do not copyright, we have to put this in, don't know why. First of all, how many of you know who GAO is? Okay, about half of you. We are part of the legislative branch. We do research for Congress, and often known as the watchdog for Congress. And I think I've gone one too many slides here. Let me see. Here we go. And we help Congress to improve their performance and accountability and provide them with objective, fact-based, nonpartisan information. The key is nonpartisan, because every time, Congress changes with whoever's in charge of Congress, we have to be nonpartisan. We were founded in 1921, and we have 3,200 employees in our 11 field offices and our headquarters here at GAO. In 2009, we showed a $43 billion measurable financial benefit from the results of our work, which represents an $80 return on every dollar invested in GAO. So you get a good return on your investment for your taxes. So, we have a diverse staff at GAO, everything from economists, social scientists, accountants, public policy analysts, attorneys, computer experts, and yes, librarians. We cover just about every topic the government spends money on. So in our library, we focus on all topics. And our work is done at the request of congressional committees and mandated in public law. So we don't have an option of whether we publish or not. We must publish. Our mission is to aid Congress, investigate, report on effectiveness of government programs, perform policy analysis. For those of you who are familiar with GAO, how many of you feel that we are accountants that just audit financial statements? None. One. Yes, we do. That's what, and I'm going to show you some other things that are in the news that you probably weren't even aware were us. We do a little bit of financial accounting still, and we do these other things that are already on the screen. Some of our most recent reports that we issued were on such things as student loans, piracy, that was a really interesting report, Deepwater Horizon response, home foreclosures, and this one I love, formaldehyde in textiles. I'm sure that's a very good read. We also issue legal decisions and opinions, all government contracts that are awarded. If any of the bidders on the contract protest the award, it comes to GAO for a decision. And we also give decisions on federal appropriations within the government. Then we have our special team, which is the Forensic Audits and Special Investigations team. They're staffed by former ATF, that's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms investigators, and Secret Service investigators, and sometimes they carry guns. So they're definitely not auditing financial accounts. You probably have seen some of the results of their work on the evening news, where they go undercover and try to penetrate airport security, illegally cross U.S. borders, and most recently exposing fraudulent practices in for-profit colleges. They have hidden cameras, so you can see the video on the news. And they're a pretty exciting group in GAO for the rest of us. Our publications, we do 800 reports. They are affectionately known as our blue cover reports, but we're now in electronic format only, so we lose the blue. We do legal decisions. One of our most popular publications is our Principles of Appropriations Law, which is important to most government agencies. And everything is done digitally now. We have done away with paper for the most part. We also do a significant number of videos, usually accompanying reports or included in reports. 10 years ago, GIO decided to create one unit that can leverage all resources that will help produce our publications, known as Knowledge Services. The library is a part of this group. Obviously, the library provides background research to produce reports and maintains the access to published content with metadata, very similar to probably what most of you are familiar with. We have a records management unit because we must capture everything we do as an official record. We have publishing that does publish our products. And we have a group called Web Content and eMedia that manages our content on our external website and also produces our video and audio content. These four groups are primarily responsible for the information from the beginning to the end when it's published. The library, as I mentioned, does extensive research using third-party external research information sources. We provide leadership and management for developing GIO's taxonomy, which has enabled us to improve our searching on our website. All of our publications are available on GIO.gov. It's important to us that they can easily be found. We're about to launch a new search engine integrated with our taxonomy that's going to greatly improve, we hope, searchability of our products. We also manage a repository of GIO publications that are published. We have an internal database of this information, and we provide the policy and the oversight of contractors who do this work for us. Once again, the metadata that's been discussed earlier today. And something that's new to us, the librarians are now contributing actual content for GIO reports. They do this through open source research, and most of you probably know what that is. That's searching publicly available information, whether it's free or purchased. We do the research, we analyze it, we produce it in spreadsheets, and then it becomes part of the report. One of the most recent ones that we did was a report where Congress asked us to look at what foreign companies were doing commercial work in the Iranian energy sector, whether it was in oil, gas, or petrochemicals. You probably realize that none of the U.S. companies can do this type of work in Iran, so Congress wondered what foreign countries were. There were a couple librarians that spent months searching this information in standard open sources, journal articles, corporate statements. We developed the methodology, we did the research, we produced the charts. The final report was basically our research. All the narrative discussed how we did it and what the results were. There was a congressional hearing on this. The librarians even got to attend it in case there were questions. It was very well received. Congress was very interested in this type of research. And we are now doing much more of this. It's very time-consuming, but it's also very rewarding. Our records management group captures and preserves all of GIO's work. This is very important to us. We are mandated by law to capture everything, and I think most of you all have to do this also. And we have an electronic records management system, which is new to us within the last 5 years, so everything is kept digitally. And they also ensure that our content and our publications conforms to GIO privacy standards. We're very conscious that we don't have any personally identifiable information in our products, especially Social Security numbers. And this particular unit has become a model for records management within the government because it's the first one to go totally electronic, and we've had a steady stream of other government agencies coming in to see our processes, see if they can work at their own agency. Our web content and eMedia group produces our publications in videos and podcasts and photography. Let's see if I can give you some facts here. We have, as I mentioned before, many videos and the podcast. We are issuing and reaching out by putting our reports on YouTube. We also have them on Twitter, not the full report, because our reports are longer than 140 characters. In fact, our titles are much longer than 140 characters. They go on and on and on. So we just kind of summarize and say, yes, our latest report is out, our latest decision is out. We do put our videos up on YouTube, as I mentioned. And we do podcast on particular hot topics of, the day, the week, whatever is happening. And they're on iTunes, and all of these are also on our website, and they are all very popular. And additionally, this group manages our content on our website and making sure it's relevant and current. Our publishing services does what you think publishers should do. A full range of it, including in-house editing, graphic support, quality assurance, print procurement, and again, it's all electronic. One of the reasons we went to electronic was cost. It saves us a tremendous amount of money. It makes it easier for us to meet our very tight congressional deadlines. And it allows us to be more flexible. We are now trying to use XML to chunk our content so that we can provide Congress access to information on their BlackBerries. Every congressman has a BlackBerry. We want to send them our reports, especially if they were the ones that requested us to do the report. Certainly don't want to read the PDF on their BlackBerry. They'd go blind. So we are trying to provide them just certain segments that are most important to them. And we've been testing that and hope to have that out soon. This is a very basic view of our workflow. LIS is the library, and of course the librarians begin the process with doing the research. Our publishing group publishes the products. Web content and e-media and the library again come in at the tail end of the process where we're providing leadership and management for the metadata, and our web content group is putting it all together and posting it to our external website. And throughout this whole workflow, our records management group is capturing all the work that we're doing electronically. This is a chart that was prepared in 2005 by Outsell Inc., which is a best practices organization that deals with information management and publishing. Some of you may be aware of them. They did a case study on us and on this whole process and our knowledge services unit and how we're managing information. On the left, the inputs, once again, the librarians doing the third-party research. We have analysts writing reports. We're capturing all of those records at that point. Knowledge services is in the center. And in our outputs, of course, are our published reports, testimony, and decisions, and all of the records captured in our electronic management system. In the center, of course, is knowledge services, which we feel is, the focus of all of this effort in GIO. It has been working very well. When we first started, I thought, I don't understand why all these groups are together. It now makes sense, and we all collaborate well and get the products out and make sure that they are findable, because it doesn't do us any good to publish something that people can't find. So that's a slightly different role model than probably what you are all working with, and hopefully you can take something away with that.
Okay, questions, comments, and can I remind you to introduce yourselves before you speak, and speak loudly so we can pick you up on the microphone. Are there any questions? I notice on Twitter, if you're not following the Twitter feed, it's pretty interesting. We're doing multiple languages at the moment, and there's a lot of discussion going on. And I wonder, Lisa Schiff? Yes. You had a couple of interesting comments on Twitter. Would you like to follow up with a question?
Sure. I had one thread, so I'm Lisa Schiff from the California Digital Library, and one of the questions that I've been thinking about a lot, and I was touching on here, what are the different models around accounting for costs and the return on investment How do we express that in a very reliable, valid way that we can take to administrators? So that's actually my most important question.
So did everybody hear that question? Different models for accounting for costs and how that can be conveyed to administrators, clearly.
And return on investment. I think
and
we
yes.
want both. We want to say, here's really what our costs are, but here is the value of what we're doing in a very clear financial way.
How to communicate that? Rick.
Let's see if this thing works. Yeah, I think it does. Is it working?
Do people hear?
Should be. Yes, it's working. Well, I think we can, as you point out, we can figure out what our costs are. That's not hard to do, but it's a return on investment piece that I think is much more difficult. But for us, in the university setting, it's the faculty. And to build that core support among the faculty and then gain their advocacy is absolutely key, I would say. And we've had great success with faculty going to the president and saying, well, this needs to be done for the library, and he listens. Whereas sometimes if the library goes and says it, it doesn't seem to go very far.
Would you like to come to this microphone, actually?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask whether, the model that folks at GAO, whether there's value in us looking at how GAO did, in fact, do their cost modeling and their return on investment. I mean, ARL does, in fact, have a study going on right now that's looking on return on investment, but not specifically about publishing. It's just looking on general library return on investment. But I think what we're looking for, and perhaps that's something the community needs to think about, is what are the various cost components out there? And if we could identify all those slices, and then you take them back to your institution and say, where is this happening? And I'm not sure we would specify that it has to happen in a particular place, but because of your structure, you could say, well, these pieces of the publishing services are happening over here, and I'm paying these people, and they're spending this much time. You can do that every so often, and I think it would be worth it. I mean, has anyone ever had to do a time accounting like accountants do? Does anybody do this? I've actually done that. It's not really so bad. I mean, it can be awful. I mean, but you can do it. You can do it for specific projects and get a sense of it. And I don't think we've got any of those projects out there. But it is probably something worth thinking about. We are talking with the AAUP about a working group that would look at a project where we would actually try to detail some of these costs, and that would be, I think, helpful for people, but that's still down the way. I don't know that I haven't ever seen anybody put anything out right now, unless anybody here has put something up. No? Bonnie, did you have anything about how you did it?
Again, a totally different model than what you're used to. GAO calculates its return on investment based on the recommendations they make in their reports. We don't have authority to tell people to do anything. What we do is we recommend that they do X, Y, and Z, and that will probably save the government X amount of dollars. And we total up all those dollars at the end of the year, versus how much it took us to actually do the research, produce the report, and we come up with a total figure. And since we're not usually sitting around thinking, okay, well, we would like to publish this or we'd like to publish that, and we're told you must do the research on this and get back to us. We have lots of reports to work with to get those figures.
But the people that are spending time on those projects, they actually have to detail that they're spending time on it.
Yeah, we charge all of our time to various codes, so we know how much we're spending.
Bonnie, are you able to say how much a report costs to produce?
Yes.
I mean, is there an average? Is there a rough range that you would say?
No, that I don't know. Obviously, some reports take a lot more time. We try to get everything out within 6 months. That's kind of our goal with working with Congress. Sometimes they want things much more quickly. Sometimes we're mandated to do reports biannually, annually, whatever. And it does, take many, many hands to produce these things, and everybody works at different wages, and all of that is factored in, and the number of hours. So I don't know that information.
I think we had a question there.
Yes, John Metter from SUNY Binghamton. I have a question, a follow-up with University or Utah State. You said that your provost has put the press sort of on the chopping block, thus marginalizing it as expendable. You also had a 17% budget cut, and you're saying you can hardly afford to buy monographs. Yet you're taking over the press and you're reallocating internally funds within the library to support the press. Politically, what kind of support for this move are you getting from the faculty? The faculty are seeing this perhaps as mission creep, and you're devaluing the traditional library support.
And I should say this question was coming up a lot on Twitter as well. What do you have to cut to do these new things?
Well, the university, this whole state education system took 17%, and our president was strategic. We actually lost no money for collections. In fact, we increased our budget for collections throughout these years. We lost some positions. The provost was, yes, it was on the block. It was on the block because of the cuts that he was taking out of his office. And but he handed over to us about half of the subsidy that had been going to the press. So we had to deal with that, but we put a plan together. And the faculty board has been very supportive. But an awful lot of faculty don't know the press exists. Now, what about reallocating resources from the library? A lot of that is not, I don't want to say it's not real money, but it's the sort of thing that you can just take up in current kinds of activities. Like, for instance, we could provide them with full IT support, and yes, that meant a little more work for our IT department, but it wasn't a new position or something that had to come along. Same for budgetary support, for finding other kinds of help with different kinds of editorial processes and so forth. So actually, the provost didn't want to chop the press, but felt compelled to at least put that out there as a possibility. So we're actually getting a lot of credit for having saved the press. And as far as the internal political climate with respect to that at Utah State, it's pretty positive. We'll just see where it goes, but I'm an optimist, and so I'm positive too.
Rebecca.
Rebecca Tennyson, Center for Digital Research and Scholarship at Columbia. I have a question for the panel. We've led in our innovative roles talking about societies. I wonder if each of you might be able to offer a bit from your perspective about innovative ways that societies might be involved in the various projects that you've discussed, or however you want to answer that question.
So the question was about societies and innovative roles that the panel might suggest being involved with societies. Rick, do you want to start on that?
Well, sure. And I'll just speak as a library dean here. We have been approached by various faculty members who are involved with their societies, perhaps as an editor, and are asking for our help. And so, the question often is, we're very happy. We have our Digital Commons platform, which has got terrific support for the editorial function for journal. We'll make that freely available to them, but often, societies exist on the revenue from the journal, and we can't help them there. So we've struggled with some of those. For those that the journal is not the revenue support, we can bring them right in, we'll give them help, but otherwise it is a problem, and we're going through this period of huge transition, and they're going to see, I honestly think they're going to see that undercut in any case, but while I'm willing to help our press, I'm not willing to help every society that comes in the door, so we can only go so far.
Julia, would you be willing to talk about, you talked about print to online transition as one way, but what about other ways that came up about how ARL libraries might help societies?
Well, we did have actually a webcast. Jennifer, where are you? Aren't you here? Oh, yes. Yeah, last year. I thought I saw you right in front, that's why. And Jennifer was on that where she in folklore, and we're talking about leaders in societies, and that research libraries who have on their campus leadership in societies might work with them to think about especially dealing with their publications. I suspect the question about their membership issues is something the society itself has to deal with, but if you can help them in terms of keeping their costs down for their publication, that might in fact allow them an opportunity for a broader discussion about the services that the society could provide that could be of benefit to their membership. And we actually still have those that webcast up in the resource that we developed as part of it in terms of talking points for society leaders. So those are more one-off conversations rather than association level, but many of your in the libraries, library liaisons are in fact members of disciplinary societies. That gives you an entree, or they have connections to the discipline on campus and have an opportunity to talk with them.
Other questions? Yes, Mike.
Julie, well, you're up. Mike Rossler from Rockefeller University Press. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a bit on your matchmaking process.
Well, the idea was, the original idea was that we would create this big list and have people go in and look, and it would be like this big acquisitions editor's dream kind of thing. That didn't work. Partly because the idea of creating a list that was pre-selected wasn't really a good idea, partly because the challenge of different institutions being able to take on others, and it was others, and how do you go after these folks? Partly because we didn't want to manage this kind of project. That seemed like not the best use of our ARL resources. So we felt it was better off that the matchmaking happen that we provide resources for libraries to do the matchmaking, because we don't want to be able to say to libraries, you must make a match. We want to be able to say, if you want to choose to do this kind of activity as part of your mission, and there are libraries that want to make a special effort. In fact, Simon Fraser has, I put the flyer out, Chuck Ekman asked that I share that because they're doing that. They're open to anybody kind of thing. But other institutions could say, no, that's not us. We're going to keep ourselves limited because at our institution we have other priorities. So
I'm just curious how it works practically. Did you make the list of 4,000 journals and say to librarians?
I don't have the list. Our consultants got the list, and part of it was because they had relationships with a vendor who was able to give them a list that, as long as it wasn't distributed, that was fine. But they did a random sample of people from that list to be able to generate information for us that we could use. What they did find, of course, was the challenge of finding people. These things are a nightmare because you don't have emails, and you don't have the right phone numbers, and you don't have the right where are they and who are you when you call them, and so in some ways it's almost easier to wait until a faculty member or the society leader comes to your door and says, I got a serious problem here. And that's, some of it is general awareness that the library could help you on campus with faculty members. So when the issue comes up, they go, oh yeah, library, that would be a good thing.
So was there cold calling?
Yeah, there was cold calling. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So they had to do an explanation of the project. They also had to explain who is ARL, so they had to do cold calls. But like I said, the first time they called one guy and he goes, I don't want to talk to you, I'm fine. But 6 months later, man, I want to talk to you. Some of the ones, when they talked to him, it was, an hour conversation because they had all this stuff and it just rolled out of them about what all the support was that they needed, when all of a sudden it clicked to them, oh, I have free consultation here. So, yeah. I don't know if we want to take 10 minutes. We have a question?
Yes, one more question, and then we'll take a break.
Okay, thanks. I'm Barbara Dietrich from Dartmouth College, and I had a question for Richard Clement about reactions from faculty about having their scholarly monograph published open access and digital, especially again in the humanities and social sciences, where we seem to get a lot of pushback from faculty in those areas because they don't consider those valid for certification purposes, as you so nicely put it, for open and tenure.
Yeah, the question is about, particularly from humanities faculty, looking at a open access digital monograph that may not be considered valid for certification. We have to hammer away at that. You know, that's a very big hump to overcome. We acknowledge that. But, you know, I think as long as we continue to emphasize rigorous peer review, that process doesn't change. Not one bit does that process change. So the press continues as it has always done with that very same process. I think the larger issue, though, for some of our faculty is the reputation kind of issue. Let's just face it, Utah State University Press doesn't have the high recognition that some other presses do, and faculty are going to want to publish with those higher recognition. I understand that, and certainly more power to them. But we want to offer this, though, to the whole range of our faculty, and we'll see. But I mean, it's going to take a lot of talking. You know, you just can't launch it and sit back. You've got to get out there and meet with every single department, get on their agenda, talk to them about what this is and what this isn't, because there is an awful lot of misinformation about what open access is and isn't. You know, a lot of people just have that knee-jerk reaction. Open access, there's no possibility there for peer review, or it's somehow a lesser form of peer review, and the P&T committees aren't going to look at that. And of course, different universities' P&T committees have different ways of looking at it. So, but really, it's a matter of getting out there and talking to people. So that's what we're doing.